Now this one looks just like where we started, but I want to point out that I've got a page 1 grid as well as a page 2 grid over here. Now if I hide the page 1 grid, page 2 grid by default is hidden. So let me make that visible so you can see what it looks like we're working with. I'm working with two separate pages. One of them asks for the name and so on. The second one asks the user to enter some comments. So let me leave this hidden, and let's make a couple visual brushes. I want my first visual brush to be my page 1. So let me select page 1, go to my tools, and make this a visual brush. P1 brush. Let me select page 2 and make it a visual brush. P2 brush. Now my page 2 is hidden, so you would expect the brush that comes from page 2 to also be hidden. But when I go to my Resources tab, both the P1 brush and the P2 brush show their contents. Remember, I've got the page 2 grid, which is the parent element of the page, hidden, not the page itself. That means that even though the parent is hidden, my visual brush is hooked to a visible element, so my brush shows what it's supposed to. Now let's go ahead and hook up some three-dimensional functionality. I'm going to go back to my page 1 grid and make it visible. And I need to add a new image of roughly the same size. I'm going to go to my asset library, find my image control, and add one to the artboard. Now I'm going to use the selection tool and let snapping help me out to get this image exactly with the width and height of my existing grid. There we go. Now I need to push this image all the way to the back so that the page 1 and page 2 are going to appear on top of it. So now, like we've done before, I'm going to convert this image into a 3D element. Under Tools, make the image 3D, and my image has been converted into a viewport 3D. Let me go ahead and expand down into it. And let me hide my two grids so that I can see my 3D image. At the moment it's transparent because I haven't set any of the materials. But let me select my model. Let me go to my properties, expand my materials category, and let me set the front material to be my P1 brush. I'm also going to select the back material, add a material, and set its texture brush to the P2 brush. Now let's take a look at what we've got. I'm going to rotate this around with the selection tool. And I've got my name, city, state, and zip on one side, and my comments on the other. But my comments are backwards. What's happened here? What's happened is all of the brushes are facing my screen. They're facing forward. I placed this brush on the back of my material, so when I flipped it over, it's now flipped over backwards. What I've actually done when I've moved this around is I've kind of moved the camera around, and you can think of it now as looking at the back of my comments page. Well, that's not going to help me, so I need to create another visual brush of my comments brush, but flipped over. I'm going to press Ctrl-Z to switch myself back to my front, and I'm going to create a new rectangle that I'm going to use to create that reversed image. Now I could do the same trick where I create a rectangle and put it in a grid where I make the grid visible or hidden, but in this case I'm just going to create a rectangle outside the bounds of my window to make it a little bit easier to work with. I'm going to hold down Control and zoom out a little bit and create my rectangle over to the right. Now at the moment my rectangle tool on the left is deselected. Why is that? Anytime your current selection is on something in a 3D viewport, you can't create any new objects because objects can't be created inside a 3D viewport. So let me select my layout root again, and you'll notice that all my controls come back. I'm going to create a rectangle, and I'm going to drag it down here below my artboard. I want my rectangle here to be the same size as my grids. So with it selected, I'm going to hold down Control, select my page 1 grid, go up to my Object menu, and make them the same size. Now I need to apply my page 2 brush to this rectangle. So let me choose my selection tool, press Control D to deselect everything, and select my rectangle. I'm going to take my fill and apply the P2 brush. Now I need to flip this over, so let me scroll down to the bottom, go to my transform, and flip it this way. Now, this visual brush is flipped over, so when I apply it to my 3D model and it gets flipped again, everything should get straightened out. So now I'm going to take this rectangle and turn it into another visual brush. Now since I'm only using one element, I don't need to group it into another grid. I can just take the rectangle directly. So this is going to be my P2 brush flipped. Now I need to reselect my model, go back to my back material, and switch my back material to P2 flipped. Now, when I select my object and flip it over, you'll see that my comments field is back the way it's supposed to be. Let me press Ctrl Z to undo that rotation. And we've got one other issue I need to deal with. As I'm rotating it, you'll see that the edges are clipping outside my viewport. That means my viewport is too small for the animation that I want to do. So let me hit Ctrl Z, move it back to its original location, select my viewport 3D, and stretch this out. Now when I stretch this out, you'll notice that my model also stretches in size, so we're going to have to move that to get it back to the right location. Now I've got a nice big viewport, but I need to reposition my element. I'm going to cause my page 1 grid to become visible again. Then I'm going to select it and set the opacity down to about 20%. What I've done now is I've created a ghost of my grid, and I just need to move my 3D element around until it fills pretty much where that ghost is. I'm going to use the camera orbit tool and just hold down the Alt key, click and drag backwards to move the camera around until I get to the desired location. Once I've got it to roughly the right size, I'll use the Control key to move it into the right position. I may not have it exactly right, but you'll see that the visual effect is still the same even though I'm a few pixels off. I've got my page 1 grid still selected. I need to move its opacity back to 100% so I'm fully opaque. And now I'm ready to set up the animation.